Go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon all. We're going to present real-life ACL this afternoon for you. My name is Potjer. I'm from the Netherlands. I am the developer of ACL Manager. And next to me is Carey.
I'm Carey. I'm from Minnesota. I have been developing websites for clients. I'm shifting more towards development, more of an interest in the ACL. And 10 years ago, I was actually working on a Java team developing role-based security systems. So that helps give me a little idea of how the ACL works.
Yeah. So in this session, Randy will first explain a bit of the basics of ACL. We will not go in detail, but he will explain a bit about it. After that, I will provide you a demonstration, a real-life demonstration about how you can set up your ACL. And after that, Randy will explain the role-based approach of setting up your ACL in your website.
So, thank you.
Go ahead.
The whole point, ACL was a big addition to 2.5. I think it helped make 2.5 much more ready for some of the bigger enterprise sorts of things, because we have different people with different business roles and different responsibilities within their companies. And it gives us an ability now to be able to, for each person, check off what responsibilities they have and how that apply over to the CMS. This is an approach that I use when I work with the ACL. I try to have the back end tailored for each individual person based upon the roles that we check. So if you check certain roles, they get to see different access to different parts of the CMS, and they get a different view totally. So 1.5 to 2.5, there was a significant change, and I'm going to go through and walk through a few of those changes. But if you look at 1.5 and 2.5, out of the box, they look very, very similar. And Andre Attar told me the reason they did that was because they wanted people to be able to understand the ACL from the older view to the newer view, and it just mapped a lot better. But the direction I'd like to suggest is to go more into a role-based, which we'll talk about later in the session, which looks considerably different than 2.5. Well, let's first look at some of the differences between 1.5 and 2.5. First, in 1.5, we have several groups that follow a hierarchical order in very linear fashion. There's no branching, there's no siblings. You have public, and if you're registered, it includes public. If you're authored, it includes registered. And so it's basically, where do you fit on this totem pole? But in 2.5, now we have groups that actually can be siblings, that have inheritance, and they can be very broad. So you have they're basically sibling groups, and you don't necessarily have to follow that linear totem pole sort of concept. Also, we can create our own user groups, unlike 1.5, and we can put them anywhere we want within the group hierarchy, giving us a lot of flexibility and customization to the needs of a business. Unlike 1.5, we now can actually have users set to several different user groups, any configuration that we want. Each individual can have his or her own settings for the groups and memberships, unique from the others. It can be one, it can be multiple ones. And we set permissions ourselves. We're the ones responsible for that. The little area up in the upper right represents the permissions for a particular component. And they map to the groups that we have. You don't set the permissions on the groups, you set them on the component or the asset or the resources within Joomla. And you can set them only for particular groups and not for all of them. That's a considerable difference from 1.5. The other thing with 2.5 is now we can set permissions not only on the components, but we can also say specifically for this category, but differently for a different category. And we can also cascade down to the objects. So when you get to the articles or content, you can set permissions on the content, or you can set them on particular categories. You can set them on particular articles. And that is available for any component that uses categories or objects if they want to implement them. And that's probably the problem we have. Not all of them do implement them, but at the core level, we do have components, category, and objects, each having their own ability to set the permissions independently. We have the ability to set permissions on several different aspects, whether they can access the administrative interface, create, delete, edit state, edit own, and of course configuring the whole component itself. These would be considered more of the core assets. But not only do we have the core assets, every extension builder that has their own extension, a component, can create their own set of assets or set of permissions that's applicable for their particular web application or component. What you're seeing here is a list that you get from EasyBlog. So, several different things that only apply to that blogging application, but you have access to administrator, manage the bloggers, manage settings, manage auto postings. This is a very rich set of permissions, and they're customized permissions for that particular component. Now, of course, not all components are doing this, but several are, and these have a big advantage for us if we want to be able to craft who can do what with a particular component. And then access levels, and actually it's very poorly named for going into 2.5. With 1.5, we had access levels was public, and then there was a smaller subset registered, and from that a smaller subset special. But with access levels in 2.5, they have no relationship with each other. Each access level is independent. There is no inheritance. How you set one access level has no setting whatsoever on the other access levels. And actually what an access level or an access scope or whatever you want to call it is basically just saying, these are the groups that I'm going to consider for having access. In other words, in the one on the far left, you will only consider for access be the ones in that highlight in the little red for the group boxes. And in the next one, it says anybody who belongs to any one of these groups, these 4 groups that are highlighted, those are the ones that now belong to this access level. So really what an access level is the scope of which groups we're going to include as far as being able to have access to this particular component. They're independent, there is no inheritance, they really have nothing to do with levels. They're more like an access list or an access scope. So there we go to 1.5 and 2.5. They look very, very similar, but the rules and the infrastructure behind them is considerably different. And it gives us the opportunity to configure them completely differently than what we get out of the box. But we have to kind of see how we apply ACL in real life in order to get from what you see in the middle to what we get more on the right. So Sander, you can go ahead and do some demos.
So, who of you already worked with Joomla ACL at all? Quite a few. And who did directly understand it? None of you. Really understood it.
Say the question again, please.
Who did understood the ACL system? Who was able to understand it directly? Much less. Okay, so that's one of the issues. So to get it more visual, how you can set it up, I will now show you a live demonstration about how you can set up some access in your website. So I have installed, let's get it on the screen, a Joomla 2.5.8 website. Just the default installation with sample data. All I'm going to tell you is the same for Joomla 3.0. The only difference is the interface, but the coding is exactly the same of the ACL part. There are not really differences between them, so you can apply them on 3.0 as well. So I have my website set up, and I'm logging in as a super user after the installation. One of the first things I'm going to do is I want to be able to create a new user group with a user in that's able to access the backend of the website. So how do you do it? First, we go to the groups manager, the user groups. And we see an overview of the current user groups. Those user groups are there more for the backwards compatibility with Joomla 1.5. When you start migrating a website, it's good that they are there. But quite often, they are confusing for most of the people that are starting to work with 2.5 ACL. Those groups are there as a sample data. And the good thing, now we can manage them this way, we can also remove those groups. So you can select them all and delete them. Joomla will not allow that for all user groups. You will have to leave the public user group, that's over here, and a super user group. So I'm going to select all others, except, I'm going to do that quicker, except the public and super user group. And now I will be able to delete all user groups as long as there are no current users in those groups. And actually, this is a kind of bug we need to fix, because you have to do it twice. And now all default Joomla user groups are removed. Now we can start on creating our own groups and understand what we're actually doing. So I will first create a new group. And I call this, in this example, the Joomla World Conference group. You always have to select the public user group as a parent. I also suggest to do that and not going to do very advanced nesting unless you understand what you're doing or using the role-based approach Randy will talk later on. So first, select the public and save and close it. Okay, so now I have created a user group and I want this user group to be able to log in on the back end of the website. So for that, I go to the site, to the global configuration, and click on that. And we're all familiar with the screen, and we click on the permission tab. On the permission tab, you get an overview of all user groups you have at your website and their permissions. Joomla has 10 basic actions you see over here in the public group, and the base of all permissions is not set. Not set actually means denied. As long as you do not allow a specific action specifically in one of those drop-downs, a user group will not be able to perform that action. So the base of Joomla is all not allowed. So you start allowing the actions you want the user group to be able to perform. So for the Joomla World Conference group, I will allow the admin login for this website. So I click on that, and you will notice that the calculated permission is not directly visible. It's only visible after saving your changes. Now we see that this user group, the Joomla World Conference, is allowed to log in on the admin of the website. I don't do any other settings at this moment. Okay, so I created this group, and now I want to be able to test if this is working. So I'm going to create a test user for this. So I go to the user manager, click on new, and I'm going to create a test user. It's a very difficult password. And I guess you will not know that. And I select the Joomla World Conference group. So I assign this user to this user group. I save and close it. And I now have this new test user. What I personally always prefer to do is to launch another browser for testing the other user. That's because otherwise I constantly have to log out and log in with my super user. So for speeding up the whole process, I launch a different browser, so Firefox in this case, and I have the site over here, and I'm going to log in with my test user. I need to refresh. I set it up too early, so okay, do it again. Test. Oh. I'm logged in on the back end, but there's not that much, right? It's a bit wide. The reason for that is that the back end of the Joomla website is built out of all kinds of modules. Like the front end of the website, we have a module for showing the 5 latest login users. We have a module for the main menu, for the icons, for the version. Those are all modules. And the access level for those modules is set by default to the special access level. So to be able to see those menus for the new user group, I need to assign this newly created user group to the access level special. So I'm going to the access levels. And over here is the special. And I'm now going to include the Joomla World Conference group as well. Save and close it. And going back to my test user. So I'm refreshing this page now, and still nothing is visible. This is because all data about the access level is stored in the user session. So as long if you're still logged in, the session is not refreshed. So you really have to log out and log in again. And now I can see a menu, the edit profile icon, and some default modules over here. So always keep in mind when you change access levels, you actually log out with the test user and log in again. A lot of people forget that, and they can waste an entire day on this. Really, I had several of those users. So
create an access level.
keep it in mind.
You create an access level also.
Sorry?
You create an access level also.
Yeah, so it's whatever you do with access level, log out and log in again. Okay, so by default, a user that's access to the backend of the website see the site menu with the control panel. That's where we are now. They can go to my profile. They can change their own user settings, but not the user groups, of course, so they cannot make themselves a super user. And we can log out over here, and we have a help menu. I can imagine you want to hide this help menu for your clients. For that, we can set it up. So I go back to my administrator account, I go to the extensions, the module manager, and as I explained, there are many modules for the backend of your website. So I select the administrator side of the modules. Now I see the overview of all modules available in the backend, and I also see that the access level is normally set to special. So this was the reason the menu, for example, was not visible yet. So I open the admin menu, and like quite often other modules in Joomla, there are several options available. And one of those options is help menu, and you're able to hide the help menu. So you hide it, save and close it. I go back to my test user, refresh the website, and now I only have that site. So this is really the basic user web. You can also hide or change the access levels of those modules on the right, but this is the basic. So I'm now having a user that is able, or actually user group, with backend access, and I now want to allow this user group to be able to access the article manager. So for that, I go back to my administrator account. I go to the content, to the article manager, and I click on the option button. And when I click on the option button, there are all kinds of settings available, as we are aware. And one of them is again the permission. And if you may notice that the site login, the admin login, and offline access are no longer available in this screen. That's because those actions are applicable for the entire website and not only this component. The article manager is a component as well. So to be able for the user, the test user, to log in on this component or to view it in a menu, I need to set the access administration interface to allowed for the Joomla World Conference group. So I click on allowed, save it, and once again I see that the calculated setting is allowed now for this action, and all other actions are not available. So let's see what happened for this test user. I refresh the page, and now I see a new menu item that's called content, like we know, with the article manager, category manager, and the featured articles. So those are all related to the article and managing of your website. At the moment, it's not possible to only allow access to the article manager. No, you have, once you allow it, you will also be able to create new categories. So when I now go to the article manager, I get an overview of all items, but I can't click on any. And I don't have any icons available to create new content, for example. So I want this user group to be able to edit all articles. So for that, I go back to my administrator account and going to change the settings for the edit to allowed. So save it again. It's now changed to allowed. Go back to my test user, refresh it, And now I can click on the articles.
Can you set it to, so that you can only edit certain articles or a group of articles?
I'm going to show that I'm going to show you that in a second.
Okay.
So I will show you how you can set up specific category for you.
I'm thinking of a situation where you have a department, and you want that department within that organization to only be able to edit their own departments.
I will show you in a second.
All right, if you do that, I'm happy.
You will be happy.
Is
Okay.
there a level between this where you can just have a view as opposed to a view and edit?
Sorry?
Someone can open it and just view the article without having edit privileges?
Just view them, or
That the link would be clickable, the click would open this page, but open
But you
in
can't save it.
read-only mode.
sorry, say it.
I think he's saying, can you get in and view the article, but you can't save it?
No,
You can't make changes.
That's not possible at the moment.
You can. You have to create a template override and
Right.
assign a template override with alternative layout.
Yeah, but for that, Randy will
Okay.
go later on in this session. So I will now continue, and let's do some more questions afterwards. Then I will probably answer a lot of questions right now. So I can edit this article and change it, like test, save, close it, and that's working fine. So that's just editing articles. But I want this user group to be able to create articles as well. But not in all categories. I only want to be able to create items in the content modules category. So when we go to the category overviews, we find this category over here. And I'm going to click on this one. And this is a bit different than the global configuration and the options of the component. There, oh, I'm doing this wrong. This is my test user, and I can't change any permissions at the moment, as you can see. I go back to my close this first. So I go back to my administrator, go to the overview again, click on this one. And now there is a button, because I'm an administrator, to set the permissions. This button will bring me to the bottom of this screen. And
How did you get there?
yeah, okay. So I go to the content, the category manager. Then I get an overview of all available categories on my website, and I just click on the title of it. And over here, there's the permissions, and I click on this button, but actually you can also simply scroll down because it's over here. So what we can see that the calculated setting is at the moment already edit allowed. And this setting is currently inherited. So that means that it inherits the setting of the component or the parent category. So at the moment they can already edit it. So we just saw that on the test browser. And now I want to allow the create action as well. So I click on allow, save it, and I now see that the calculated setting is allowed as well. I go back to my test user, back to the article manager, and now the new button is available in the toolbar. It wasn't there before. I can click on that, and I'm able to create a new article. So you will see demo, and the only category available is the one I allowed. So that is, now you're happy, right? So this user group is only able to create articles in the category I allowed. So I'm going to simply add some data in here, save and close it. And when I select or filter on this category, I have the GWC demo available. And as we can see, the status is disabled. This test user can open it, but cannot publish it. To allow that, I had to go back to my administrator account and change the edit state to allowed as well. If you want to allow this user group to publish them as well. So I do that. Hit save again. It's now allowed. Go back to my test user, refresh this page, and now I can publish it as well. Save and close it. And now this article is published. So let's say I want to allow this user, so I go back to my user administrator account, close this one, this category, and I want to allow the user also to select the user modules category. So do actually the same, allow create, allow the edit state, save it. It's working. Going back to my test user, create a new one. And now I can select 2 of those categories. We also notice that the edit state action result that the publish, unpublish, featured, archive, check-in, press buttons are also available. So as soon as you allow that action, those will become available as well. But only when you select that specific category again. Okay, let's say I go back to my administrator and I want all of these categories have the same settings. I can repeat the things I just did for another couple times, but it's a lot of work. So you can save yourself a lot of work, especially when you have hundreds of the same categories with the same settings, by simply changing the setting, the permission settings, for the parent category. So I will show that. I will go to the modules, change the edit state to allowed and the create to allowed. Save this, going back to my test user, create a new article, and now I can select between all those. So the settings of the parent category are inherited to all nested ones below that. So that's about allowing access to certain areas of your website. This is a content example. And Randy will show some more later on about setting up the right roles. You can imagine a certain role has only access to certain categories. But what about components? Peter?
Can I ask a question about images, PDFs, etc.? Is it possible to limit those users to certain directories to put their content in?
At the moment, the Joomla Media Manager doesn't have any access levels. So you cannot set permissions to upload or whatever, use images in certain folders. But when you use an editor like GCE editor, you can create profiles with allowing access to their own folders, for example. So that might be a solution for that when you want to allow access to only specific images on your website. So use GCE editor.
And those settings that you just did there, do they also allow them to create categories and subcategories under the categories that you allowed them into?
No, at the moment it's not possible to prevent creating categories. So when a user is able to create articles, they are also able to create categories in those categories.
But only with the same rights as that category that they're in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that one of the good new features will be to prevent creating categories in only articles, for example. So we need to split that up, but that's probably something for one of the next Joomla versions. Okay, so I'm going to install, I'm going to my administrator account, and I'm going to install, first I will quickly show you what we just set up. With ACL Manager, my extension, so I will install this. I will go to ACL Manager, and ACL Manager is using the Joomla core ACL settings. So it's not creating a different ACL structure, it's only displaying the information you just set up on a different way. So when I now go to this newly created group, I can click on that. I get an overview of the settings I've made to this user group. And the screen is not that best contrast, but these are kind of gray icons, and you normally see easier what actions are available. I just used for now the article managers. So when I filter on the articles, I get a good overview of what I just allowed. And remember, I just only used the allowed action. I not did anything with denied, I just allowed to a specific area. So I allowed the global configuration, allowed access to the articles, allowed the edit action for all categories in articles, and I allowed to create action for the modules, content modules, and need to show some more. The nested rows below. And as you can see, when I allow this module, the nested display module category is inheriting that value as well. So ACL Manager will make it a bit more easier to have a good overview of what you just did on your website. And you can also simply allow for this one, the action as well, save it. So instead of going to all those screens, you can do it in a clickable grid overview.
Can you show them just the show items so you don't show items so it's
Yeah.
more compact?
So
the filter is really helpful.
when I do not want the articles be visible and just the categories, I can hide them with this filter. And actually, these two are not needed because I allowed it over here. So I can reset them and save it. And now it's a good kind of setup for your website. Okay, Randy already explained in his introduction that it really depends on the components if you can use a bit more actions of those. So I will install, for example, a Kiva backup now. I guess many of you use this extension. And the cool thing, oh, he added even more.
Yeah.
That's new to me. Let's see.
That's funny. Okay.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, Nicholas is having, let's see where, it's always sometimes, normally I always prefer that the option button is simply in the toolbar, so it's kind of generated. And I asked Nicholas to do that, but he didn't change it yet. But the component parameters are listed over here. And again, there are actions available. And as we can see, we see two default Joomla core actions. That's the configure, who's able to pull up this screen to make the settings, and access administration interface. But Nicholas also added 3 additional actions. Backup, now configure, so this kind of double thing, I think we made a quick mistake with it, and download. So you can also allow specific user groups to download backups or create backups. So this really makes it flexible when extensions are starting to use the Joomla core ACL system. It might be helpful when you start using extension for your projects to check if you are able to configure these kind of actions. So when I now allow the backup,
That's public.
Oh, you have to go in public.
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, public, thanks, very sharp, for the Joomla World Conference, the allowed one. Oh, let's change another setting. Oh, I will go back to my to ACL Manager. And I'm going to list all components only. And over here is a Kiva backup. And the additional actions added by a component are also listed over here. But I want this user group to be able to access a Kiva as well. So I allow access, save it, go back to my test user, and refresh the page. Now the components are available and only a Kiva backup is visible. The user can access it and is able to create backups. I will now install another extension, and that will be Zoo. Installation successful. And Zoo is actually one of the extensions, and there are about 8 people out here, youth team out here, so please ask them to integrate ACL, because it's missing. So you're not able to say, okay, my user group is able to access this component. I install it, but in the component menu, I cannot show it up, because I cannot allow to access this component anywhere in the settings. So to solve that, there are 2 options. Or you're going to hack the extension by adding the permissions yourself. It's not that much work. If you're interested, on my website aclmanager.net, there's a tutorial. It only takes you 5 minutes. But the bad thing of it is that you are going to change the core files of this extension. So you probably have to do it each time when an update is available. Another option, because I know that a lot of users are kind of frustrated with this, is that I created an option in ACL Manager to allow the setting anyway, so without hacking the extension. But for that, the diagnostic check is giving an error, and it also see that the ComZoo extension is missing some assets in the database. So ACL Manager is able to fix those by clicking on a button. And when I now go back to my control panel and click on the group, you will be able to allow access to the Zoo component. And this icon will explain that it's added via ACL Manager and not in the extension itself. So when I now save it and go back to my test user, they're able to access Zoo again. So it's still not possible to really configure access to just the block in this example. But that's one of the things that might, hopefully, when your team is going to add their permissions, is one of the opportunities. You can imagine that when components are starting to add their own permissions, it allows you a lot of flexibility. For example, a form extension. You have created several forms, but you only want a user group to be able to access a specific form, to change it or just view the submissions. So when you start selecting your components for using your website and you want to use ACL or the role-based ACL approach, you should really check on the availability of the permissions. If it's not available, please suggest the developer to add those permissions. It's a kind of, in my opinion, it's a kind of requirement to say I'm 2.5 ready or 3.0 ready. Peter?
If you go to components for this test user and to Akiba, you have all those buttons.
Yeah.
Shouldn't this developer hide all those buttons that should not be used? Because only backup now is possible in this extension now.
Yeah. So this really depends on the developer itself. Like Nicholas could also add many other actions to allow clicking on specific icons. And for example, Randy explained the easy block thing with all those actions to manage. That's really working in that way.
But if you press configuration, you can't press it. Yeah.
So Nicholas would be a good suggestion to hide that button.
Yeah.
And it's possible, but it depends on the developer.
Okay.
So I now explained the kind of basic things to allow access to certain areas of Joomla and how you can solve the component issues. I would like to ask Randy now to explain more about the role-based approach, and that will make it very flexible for you to set up the ACL.
Okay.
So I will put up the slides again.
Thank you. By the way, I did write about role-based ACL in the Joomla magazine on the August and September issues. So there's more detail there you can go back and refer to that maybe you can't handle that one. Role-based is a known procedure. It's been developed, I think, in the 80s and 90s, was formalized in the mid-90s. You can go to Wikipedia and you can see about role-based access control. It just happens that the way the ACL in Joomla was set up for 2.5 is very, very conducive for a role-based approach. Basically, what role-based means is the ovals in the middle represent what could be user groups in Joomla, but actually roles that are used in business, a person's responsibility, things that they need to control. Usually it's like a file system in Unix or whatever, but in the CMS could be the components or particular articles or categories. And then these actions or permissions are the green, are tightly linked to each particular role. What changes more through time are people's assignments to roles, which are represented by the blue lines. A person can be assigned to one or more roles and in any configuration of roles. This is basically the role-based access control, and there's actually 4 different types of it. This is called, I call it RBAC 1, which means that the roles are inherited from each other. So you could have a set of permissions and actions in one that actually is inherited by others, and you could have this whole configuration. And there's a couple of other different configurations that will RBAC 1 and 2 and 3, but this is what we got out of Joomla. And so the whole goal is to have something that when you check off the roles or responsibilities that a particular person has, we're automatically granting them access to different parts of the site. I'm using mission control for my particular admin module or admin template, so it looks a little bit different than what you might have seen with Bluestork or other examples. But each person, depending on what they have their roles checked, are going to see a back end that looks a little bit differently, and they're going to have a different access. The same system, it just changes based on what we assign them to. So, basically, the difference between role-based and the older approach with 1.5, we basically had that totem pole hierarchy of everything accruing as far as permissions. But now we have all of our permissions, all of our access to is more like a pie with different slices. So we would have like events, stored newsletters that are independent of each other instead of hierarchically being built. So what does a role base look like? It looks like a bit more like the pie, and we give people just enough permissions or actions in order to do what it is for their particular task. No more. That's called the principle of least permissions. Also, they tend to be more isolated and independent, non-overlapping. So if you have an events component, for instance, you maybe have a slice about the events. And if you did cover events again, it might be because you're giving them somebody more permissions for that. But if you have one slice maybe for events, one's for calendaring, newsletters, or whatever different types of roles people might have. So also can be assigned, a user can be assigned to more than one role. We aren't trying to have a role represent everything a user can do. It's rather a slice, and a user might have different slices. And also, 2 people can share the exact same role. And a person can be assigned more than one role. I just went backwards. We also can easily add, remove, transfer roles from one person to another. In this way, the Joomla is just basically checking the user groups, and each user group maps directly to a particular role. It's easily added, removed, or transferred. And roles represent the realities of business, the actions, the permissions, the way a business might say, this is your role. Your role is to manage the newsletter. Your role is to manage the testimonials. Your role is to manage maybe content in a particular department. So the realities of the business world, we take those to map them over into the roles that we're creating or user groups that we're creating in Joomla. And each person then can have his or her own unique configuration of responsibilities. So we're taking people in the real life situations, we check off what each person can do, and then each person will have a different perception and when they get into the back end, the admin, as far as what they have access to, and perhaps even how the whole back end looks for them. I use a tool from Rocket called Mission Controls, the template, and they call it Rock Quick Links. This allows me to create a dashboard of icons. You give it a title. You actually give it the URL of the admin end, starting with the index.php question mark, in this case option red shop, and view, and it goes on like that. You can actually set filter values in there as well. So you only filter to a certain particular category with whatever component you're working with. And then you can choose the icon as well. And then this is an example of what I've done for a community theater where they have a ticketing, the role for ticketing with, they can see what tickets are sold, they can edit ticket details, etc. They also have page contents on the current play, past plays, things like that.
I have a question about
Yes.
this one.
This one?
Yeah, it looks like you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 modules that run on this page.
Actually, the ticketing is one module, an admin module, and the page content's another admin module. And so in this case, if they can be ticketing, I give them like basically 3 access is.
Right, but K2 stats is a module.
Oh, this is another module itself that I probably shouldn't put on the slide.
Well, my question is, if, let's say K2 stats is a module, but
Yes.
your user doesn't have access to it, but you got it set to special so that they can see the module shows up. Why is there still the special? You have the public, you have the registered, you have the special.
We
but
could
then
get
you
rid
have
of
all that other stuff that you're doing.
I suppose we could get rid of special, but a lot of the modules are already set to special. So, I could have set K2 to a particular access level that's at a K2 access level. That only if somebody's checked to have access to K2 will be able to see. So this doesn't even have to be special. I can change that. Okay, and I probably shouldn't even have shown this on this screenshot, but I took a real live screenshot what I had for demo purposes. It made it better to clean it up and not to have those.
Okay, so
But
in the
you're right.
module-
These are each its own module.
So in the module manager, when you pick whether or not the module is public, or whether or not it's registered, or whether or not it's special, you don't have that same access level control.
I actually add more access levels that are specific per role, which I'll show in just a minute. Okay.
Very quickly though.
Yes, very quickly because we're running out of time. So basically what I do when I set up roles, I don't think of the groups as a group of users. I think of them as a role, a set of responsibilities. And again, it's responsibilities based upon the business rules. Each person then is going to have, I don't try to match it per person, but I say what are the different slices people might need. So it might be more slices per person, so it's not per person. This is an example that I've done. I usually start with back-end access, which gives straight access, and then inherited from that I have roles like blogger, calendar management, document manager, and I go down several of them here. This is what I did for an international site where I have Deutsch or German, English, Chinese, and I actually had different groups that I set up that would tie into profiles in JCE. So if you have the simplest editing tool, they only see the simple editing bar, and maybe you could go to a certain directory for uploading their files, and they don't get access to the whole image directory. So this is where I add some extra. They aren't really roles, but I'm using the ACL in order to let them assign people to different editing capabilities. So what I do is I basically, Sandra showed a lot of this before, I go to the global configuration, I have my back-end access, I only set it to allowed, and then I create my different roles, events, newsletters, and stores. For each component, for each role, I think of the component. So for events, I maybe have a calendaring component. I go there, and the only thing I set would be the actions and permissions for that events under that. And for newsletters, I go to my newsletter component. The only permissions I set is for the newsletter group. And then for the e-commerce, I set the permissions that I need only for that store particular group. Then I create my access levels, role-based access levels. It's a one-to-one relationship. Events contain only the group events. Newsletter contains only the group newsletter. Store, only the group store. What I do with my role-based access levels is put a tilde in front. It helps group them together when you see the list because I can't order them, but it puts them more in alphabetical order. And it also lets me know this is a role-based access level that's above and beyond public, registered, and special. And then what I do is I have the admin modules. I set them to those role-based access levels, which, for instance, on the event, the calendar one is set to the access levels to events, which events includes only people who are in the events group. And so only people who checked in the events group can see that particular module. That's the way I'm able to make the back end look tailored depending on how you check off different boxes. Just something like that. And a very important part of it, which I'm going to be concluding now, is you have to have a person who's able to assign people to different roles. And this is very important because it's got to be a person you trust. You can't let just anybody assign different people to different roles or you defeat a lot of the whole purpose of this. And so you need to create basically a user manager and assign that particular person to the right responsibilities. I'm adding that user manager there. I created a role-based access level for that. And I go and I set the permissions at the global level for the user, or go to the user manager, I go to options, go to permissions, follow this whole pattern, I save it. And when the person logs in who just has user manager permissions, this is all they see. They see the module I created for the user manager, and they have that little tab jumps down on the main menu showing the user manager, and they can create new people, they can go and edit the profiles, and they can do the mass mailing to the different users. And that's all they can do if that's the only role that they have. And it cascades on like that. We're really out of time.
We're really out of
so
time.
we thank you for your attention and
Yeah, we will both be around today. So if you have